Good day, everybody. It is Calxiyn here, and if you guys enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe for more RWBY videos, and that this video was brought to you guys by my patrons and my YouTube membership members, so thanks to them for their support. Today we will be talking about the RWBY fairy tale book, and our story for today is the Grimm Child. The tale is pretty self-explanatory in itself, but it has some really interesting lore details that we're going to talk about today. There's like a really terrifying Grimm that is now canon to the show that we could possibly see someday, so we should talk about that. So what we're going to do is summarize the fairy tale, analyze the fairy tale, and compare it to real fairy tales in our real life, and then we are going to talk about the lore elements and stuff like that. So to summarize, Poppy and her brother go into the woods, which they are forbidden to enter, and it's a very common theme in fairy tales, like Little Red Riding Hood is forbidden from going off the path and going into the woods. Like, so many fairy tales have woods as this, like, forbidden place to go, and part of it is because, like, the woods were actually dangerous during these times, and so a lot of people were sort of making fairy tales, like, for other adults, but also, like, for, you know, I guess adult children, if that makes sense. Like, hey, don't go into the woods because there are bad things in the woods. And I think that the woods just sort of, you know, encaptured people in that sort of way, because back in those days, like, I'm sure people went into the woods and never came back. And so it's important to note, right, fairy tales started as adults making stories for other adults. That is, like, how fairy tales sort of began. Like, there was no concept of children's literature or making literature specifically for children at that time. So these were more like campfire stories that you would tell, like, amongst other adults, or that you would tell, like, to an entire village. They weren't necessarily children-based. But obviously, you know, no, don't go into the woods is a valuable lesson for adults and children, but it has sort of developed into a children lesson as time went on, because I guess, I don't know, adults just knew that they shouldn't go in the woods. Right? Almost like scary stories. Like, scary stories are for all ages and stuff like that. And so, yeah. And this also just speaks to the experience of childhood, like, if we are looking at it in a sort of children's literature lens, and how, you know, places that are reserved for adults are enticing to children. Like, you can't go into the woods unless you're an adult, because, you know, you're not an adult yet. Like, that sort of thing is very enticing to kids, because they want to be brave or independent like adults. And in RWBY, obviously, the woods hold real danger, because they have Grimm in the woods. And so, you know, there are multiple fairy tales in the fairy tale book of characters going into the woods and getting, like, attacked by Grimm and stuff like that. And so, you know, it makes a lot of sense that within the world of Remnant, you would want to tell other adults, like, don't go into the woods alone. And then, you know, later children, don't go into the woods alone and stuff like that. And woods also tend to be, I think it's called a liminal space. I don't have the notes from my fairy tale class, so I'm going by memory, but basically a transition space. Like, venturing in the woods is like a portal to another world. So you have Poppy's village, you have the portal to another world, and then you have the woods. So that transition from the town into the woods is like what people call, like, liminal spaces in writing, right? Liminal spaces have a different meaning when, I don't know if this is relevant, but if you guys have ever heard, like, an airport as a liminal space, like a transition place to one thing to another and all that stuff. So yeah, it has a different sort of meaning when we talk about real life compared to a story, but it's basically just a portal. Like, there is a sort of a veil between the town and the woods, and then when you crossed it, like, you are changed and the character is changed when we talk about fairy tales and fantasy. So Poppy basically teases her brother to go into the woods. Like, she goes into the woods, she stays in there, nothing, like, super bad happens to her or whatever. She feels a little cold, but not a big deal, and so she's like, I'm fine, it's your turn, brother. And so the brother goes into the woods, and he stays in there a long time. He is curled up into a ball, and he is cold to the touch when Poppy goes to get him, and Poppy's like, I'm sorry, brother, for being a bad sister, basically. And so she brings him home, which again is crossing from the other side, like, this other world back into her own world, and it's bringing the danger with her. And so basically, if we were gonna talk about the chill, the Grimm that has been introduced, the Grimm basically latches on to Poppy and Oak, and then they take this dangerous Grimm out of the woods and then bring it into their life, like, bring it into the town. And so while I was reading this story and sort of the chill and stuff like that, like, we didn't know it was a chill until, like, the very end, but I'm just telling you guys that so you get the context of why Oak is cold and why Poppy was also cold. It's because the Grimm was possessing them, and they then brought that danger back into their own village. What I was thinking when I was reading this story was fairy tales like the Pied Piper and like disease and stuff, because I was talking to Arnold, we were reading the book together, and I was like, oh shit, it's the plague, right? Like I thought it was supposed to be a metaphor, and it could be, right? But basically, like fairy tales like the Pied Piper are theorized to be about illness and about the plague. Like the Pied Piper, if you guys don't know, he plays the flute and like takes the children away when the village doesn't pay for him for taking away the rats, and obviously the rats carried the plague. So there's lots of different interpretations of the Pied Piper, but that's basically one of them, is that, you know, the Pied Piper took the rats away, like the plague rats away, but then because the Pied Piper wasn't paid, he takes the children away, and that's not, like, the children didn't go away and live happily ever after, like the children went away to die, right? And so some people think that the Pied Piper was made to explain child death through disease, to explain why children, like a bunch of children, suddenly disappeared. It wasn't suddenly disappearing, they all died of the plague, but the story was made, you know, I guess to feel like the story was made by the townspeople in order to sort of, I guess, cope in a way, like, oh, the Pied Piper stole our kids, they're still out there, something, you know, something like that. And it's also sort of a metaphor for like the Grim Reaper and passing to the other side, like the Pied Piper carries the children away. And so yeah, death. So that's basically what the Grimm Child reminded me of, was a fairy tale where it's all sort of a metaphor for disease, and, you know, soon the whole town is wiped out. And so I sort of wonder, like, we haven't heard a lot about sickness in Remnant, so I would really like to know from E.C. Myers or, like, from Eddie or whoever. I may try to at them on Twitter and sort of get the answer from them, like, if Remnant has diseases, because we've never really seen anyone sick, and so I wonder if I could pick their brain and see if the canon of this story is actually, like, you know, the people sort of made the chill as a sort of scapegoat, like, oh, that town was wiped out, like, by a chill, by a Grimm, instead of, like, that town was wiped out by diseases, but we don't understand disease yet because we don't have science, you know what I mean, whenever the fairy tale was made in Remnant. What's important about the plague and other diseases, like, more so before the plague, because I feel like by the time the plague got around, like, you had people that were sort of, you know, sciencing and sort of knew that, like, something was killing them that they just couldn't see type of thing, but a lot of people think, like, plagues and stuff were some sort of divine situation, and they sort of attributed it to, like, a god or a demon or, you know, stuff like that, especially, like, you have the Grim Reaper, and then you have, like, in the Bible, right, like, oh, the plague was brought on by God instead of the plague was brought on by bacteria, right? And so in this case, the way I'm thinking about it is that the chill is sort of that representation, like, oh, it was the chill that did it, not, you know, the bacteria that did it, exactly. So, you know what I mean? And so it's also important to note that in the story, all the children get white hair and black eyes, which is obviously a trait of Salem, and Ozpin in his notes basically says that people probably just plucked that from the story of White Witch and applied it onto, you know, this story. So basically, like, they basically made all of the children, like, turn into Salems, but that doesn't actually happen when you get possessed by the chill, because the chill is a real thing, and we are going to talk about that. And the chill is a canon Grimm that exists within Remnant, and that chills can possess anyone with the slightest touch. And so basically, I'm going to just read out some of the lore stuff, because I feel like that's a good way to sort of end this. You may be relieved to know that the chill in a human host cannot speak or act normally the way that Poppy does. If someone has been taken over by a chill, you would know immediately. They cannot speak, and perhaps they will only repeat the same word over and over again, the last word that the human spoke. Moreover, chills cannot control a human body for more than a few minutes, making it impossible for them to kill an entire town in one night. They rely on the element of surprise and the unwillingness of most people to kill a friend or a loved one until they are certain that they are already lost. A small comfort, perhaps, for if you are ever unfortunate enough to encounter one, you will likely not survive to tell the tale. So basically what Ozpin is saying is that yes, the chill actually exists, but it can't necessarily, like, the things that the chill has done are, like, hyped up for the story. It can only control a human body for, like, no more than a few minutes, like, it couldn't kill an entire town in one night, like, all that sort of stuff. And so Ozpin is like, yeah, this scary Grimm does exist, but you're fine, don't worry about it, right? That it's sort of been exaggerated. And so on another important note, the descriptions of the possessed children and the dead townspeople in the original tale do not include the white skin and hair or the black eyes. So where did the white hair and skin come from? And why did I choose that particular description for this collection? I believe that over the years, years, some versions of this story have been conflated with another fairy tale about a white witch in the woods, which bears some striking resemblance to the Grimm child. So he's basically saying that people got Salem confused with the Grimm child. Ozpin goes on to say that it could be our natural inclination to want evil to be easily recognized, like rather than accepting that evil can lurk behind any face. In a sense, like, we want, you know, darkness to be obvious. We want darkness to look scary, like Salem, like the White Witch in the woods. But most of the time, darkness is like asymptomatic, you could say, right? And so that's sort of an interesting tidbit, is that people want it to be obvious when someone is controlled by a chill, but they're not. And so now to talk about some interesting, like, crack theories that sort of relate to this. Imagine if Neo was just a chill that was able to keep on to, like, holding on to Neo for a long time. Because again, okay, Ozpin said that the chill can only do this for a couple minutes, but in the story, Ozpin also says, remember, anything is possible where the darkest of evil was concerned. So I'm like, he's saying anything is possible. So, you know, what if it could be? If it could be where the darkest evil is concerned. And so, like, that would basically call into question, like, oh my god, that would be so fire, because it would be like, okay, is Neo's personality hers, or is it the chill? Did the chill gain the consciousness if combined with a human? Like, we have so many stories of monsters wanting to become human, and so I sort of wonder, you know what I mean? Like, what if the chill, like, grew a consciousness and, like, grew, like, a mind and stuff like that, like, by, like, controlling Neo and just stayed there? Like, imagine? And so many people think that Neo is based on the Little Mermaid, especially because she doesn't speak, but what if she doesn't speak because she's not the Little Mermaid, she's a chill, and so, like, you could compare Ariel, right? Like the chill that wanted to be human, and that, like, that would be genuinely hilarious. I think that's a fascinating idea, right? Because we sort of have Grimm as these, like, terrible monsters of evil who are capable of learning, right? Oobleck does say that if a Grimm lives for a long time, it can learn and stuff like that, right? And so, I don't know, man, like, it seems to have some type of consciousness like an animal, but imagine if it could develop, like, some type of consciousness like a human. Like, what would a human Grimm want? All that sort of stuff. So yeah, regardless, I do hope that we can see this Grimm inside of the show. It's probably not Neo, guys, but I do wonder if we could see someone possess, and if that someone could fight against the Grimm possession somehow, or if they would just, like, immediately die. I also like how Ozpin in his notes basically references that video games and movies have been made about this fairy tale, because it makes the world of Remnant feel a lot more real, like how we've seen, you know, like Slenderman get movies and books and video games. It's sort of, you know, the same thing like that. It's sort of, oh yeah, like, this story has inspired video games and movies and stuff. So I really like that element that they added to Ozpin's whole thing. You know, like, oh yeah, this is a popular story within the world of Remnant. Like, they make comic books out of this. Like, I just thought that was a really nice touch to all of it. And I really like that, because that does develop and give the world more depth and more, you know, more lore and more history. I guess you could say that the world of Remnant functions a lot like our real world, and that's kind of interesting. So what do you guys think of the new Grimm? Let me know down below, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye, guys.